go on to our current segment that we've been doing since we started this whole show called Vulnerable Voices. And on this week's episode, Cody and I were watching a show on HBO that really sparked this topic. And the show's called I May Destroy You. And let us know if you've watched the show I May Destroy You by Michaela Coel. It was a BBC show that made its way to HBO. It premiered in June of this year on HBO. And just to read you the plot real quick, Arabella, who's played by Michaela Coel, is a Twitter star turned novelist who found fame with her debut book, Chronicles of a Fed Up Millennial, and is publicly celebrated as a millennial icon. While struggling to meet a deadline for her second book, she takes a break from work to meet up with friends on a night out in London. The following morning, she struggles to remember what happened to her, but recalls the events of the night with the help of her friends Terry and Kwame. And all I can say is she goes in and out of what she remembers, and a lot of it has to do with consensual sex, which is our topic today for for Vulnerable Voices. And it brings up a lot, because I think what the show, Cody, and I want to hear your thoughts real quick on the show. I think what Michaela done a really good job dealing with consensual sex, and let's just say rape, is she's shown the varied nuances of consensual sex on when it can go, when it crosses the line, and when it's not okay, when it's not consensual. And I think we were talking offline earlier, we all have ideas of what rape is. And I was using the example offline that in so many of our minds, rape is in an alleyway, two guys grabbing a woman by a dumpster, putting her head down and having their way with them sexually, and then running off, and no one ever sees these two guys. And that is what so many of us have been indoctrinated to think about what rape is. But there are so many other layers that we don't talk about enough, which we want to talk about more, and we want to bring it into our community a little bit more about what is consensual and what is not. And I think she does a really good job of inflecting that in this show. Do you agree?
I agree 100%. I feel that this show really encompassed so many different viewpoints on what consent means and what it means to relate to a person in a sexual manner. It really enlightened me as far as like my awareness, because as the show goes on, her awareness grows, and as her awareness grows, it just shines so many lights on the things that are acceptable and unacceptable when it comes to consent.
Exactly. We welcome you to engage in this conversation. And I believe a couple of people have some feedback already, even before we get into our stories about... Cody, can you read some of them so I don't have to...
Yes. JJ, on the previous topic, JJ says, lovely things to think about. Definitely things to think about as far as when we want to go into a space and actually social distancing. Jen has seen I May Destroy You, and she thinks that there is great writing. And she says it's a very honest account of what women and gay males go through when dealing with the heteronormative world at large. So I think those are brilliant accounts.
I love it. Yeah. So important. Yeah. I think I'll start off with one of my stories that was really sparked. And I think what art like this can do by someone like a Michaela. Also, I think it's a good shout out to HBO showing different voices that interweave. It's her story in London, but it's also a gay story, and it's all melded together. And I think it's more representative of life today. And I think that's so important, and it's what we want to do too. One of the things that I was thinking about was more recently, and it goes back to the episode of Dr. Goldstein that I have on the other day, episode 212 of Tag's podcast. And one of the things I was telling him when we were talking about the importance of lubrication was I had a guy more recently that only wanted to use spit to fuck me. And I let that happen to me, but oftentimes as the bottom, I found myself letting him go there. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about on this week's after show, just to plug our after show that you can get on our Patreon page, you can go to patreon.com/talk about gay sex. And I'm going to be sharing an episode that I had before that I had an anal fistula, and that's something that can happen that you have to surgically have mended in surgery. You don't want to have that, but when it does happen, and mine was successful and it's all good. But that, as a result, I'm a little bit more cautious of that area of my ass, and lubrication for me, I think, is really utmost important. And I think it's really important for so many people. And with this person that I was seeing more recently, they were a lot more comfortable with just ramming their dick in me, just simply using their spit. And as we all know, spit isn't a lubricant. It's something that can help get the dick inside something initially, but it dries up really quickly. There's a reason why they came up with lubrications. And again, you can get 20% off pure by being a listener with us.
Way to work in that plug, girl.
I mean, but seriously, on a serious note, that was something as somebody in their late 40s that I just saw my Dr. Goldstein after the episode to have a checkup down there. And I made a concerted effort for myself to never allow anybody to go up there unless we have lubrication. In other words, if somebody's like, oh, well, I'm just going to spit here, or we're just going to use this lotion over here. It's like, no. I am barely at this age making new correction adjustments for what I'm going to allow. And I think sometimes in these sexual situations, we can find ourselves, well, okay, and go along with the other one's intention, but really it doesn't speak to your story and what's right for you. And I know for me, what's right is I need lubrication, and it's taken me this long to even come up with that. And I have some other stories, but I wanted to hear from you, Cody, to share a story. And I know you were telling me offline that you had a couple stories. Share one of yours when you felt that something was not consensual.
So, I mean, the first story that I want to share is, I've shared it on here before, and it was when I was going to hire a photographer and for promo shoots, for headshots, things of that nature. And I went over to his house and he examined me. And he said, this will work better if you look like this and this. Basically, it's called negging, what they make you feel kind of like horrible about yourself. And then they go in for the kill. It's what predators do. Something that a predator would do.
Where they feel you might be lacking.
Exactly.
And find your weaknesses. Ugh, I'm already disgusted. I hear you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So then he said to me, well, if you let me suck you off, then all your pictures will be for free. And
did you do it?
I did it. I did do it. And afterwards, I felt so dirty and I felt so taken advantage of. So it just brings back so many horrible memories for me. And it makes me feel so taken advantage. Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting because you and I were talking offline, and at first I was very quick to say, well, you agreed to the situation, and it was sort of a business. Like you hired this guy to take your pictures, and then he brought this up. He didn't do something to you without asking. In other words, he presented, here is the situation that if you want, you don't have to pay for any of these pictures if you just do this. And at first I was thinking, well, that's not really what we're talking about in terms of consensual, because you had a choice in all of this.
Yeah.
But after talking it through with you, I realized that,
and we talked a long time.
We did. That there is, in other words, I think there's an idea of people preying on other people. And here you were moving to New York. Here you were trying to get your career off the ground. You needed these pictures. Obviously, he also found probably a weakness. I'm assuming you didn't have money flowing all over. The idea that waiving the photography fees was probably a great thing because that money could go to rent, food, so on and so forth. In other words, you weren't at probably a point, and he found that weakness. And it's that whole idea of catching you at that moment in a weak state where you have to make a quick decision. He maybe didn't grab your genitals.
Yeah.
In a lot of the ways we think about people crossing lines, but he put you in a position, you made a rash decision and didn't like the way you felt afterwards. And it's way more than just being inappropriate. It's using people, and often we find that happens with our community, with women, of course.
You made a good point. You mentioned the Me Too movement, and it lends itself to that type of situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Comments? Do we have comments before we move on to our next story of this?
Jennifer actually commented on your story about the guy that you were seeing. She asked, was he willing to be rammed in return? And what do you say to that?
So we had already decided in the situation that he was a top. Well, he had decided. I am more versatile. He knew I liked to bottom. I think he only tops. And I did find myself bringing it up at one point. And I felt like he never really understood the importance of being ready as a bottom, that you're not just always ready to go, that the importance of lubrication, it was sort of not taken seriously. And to answer your question, and what I have learned, like I said a few minutes ago, is that I now have in my late 40s here, new rules, to quote Bill Maher.
Everybody's awareness is evolving.
Yeah.
Everybody's evolving constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and shows like I May Destroy You do a really good job of showing the nuances of when somebody is violating. It's the obvious of what so many of us, I'm sure, think of what a rape is, but it's on and on of subtler stories. And one story I had when I was in college, I can remember I was on the gymnastic team. I'd gotten a partial scholarship, and there was a guy that befriended some of us gay gymnasts, and he had made himself known. This was at UC Berkeley, and I remember meeting him, and he was attractive. We went to a library together, and in one of the aisles he proceeded to also just spit on his dick and literally rammed it up in me. And later, which I didn't feel comfortable at the time, and when we were done later, when I told him that I was getting an HIV test, this was the late 90s or mid 90s, so it was still that scare time frame. I remember telling him I got an HIV test, and he immediately turned it on me and was blaming me. Oh, well, did you do anything that think you have it? Oh shit, like now I have to
Which
get
is
tested and blaming. I was doing my due diligence. I was just telling him that I was getting it, and I said, no, I haven't really had any. And I should have said, but I should be worried about you as you rammed
yeah.
it up with no condom on up
How
my
many other
ass.
people are you doing this to?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he really vilified me in that situation, and I
Which
took
is another tactic of an abuser, and they mention in the show.
exactly. And
Yeah.
right. And I think oftentimes there's another character in Kwame that has a situation. We'll let you all watch it, but
I know, right? I don't want to
that,
reveal too many things.
no, that he doesn't get a lot of support for his situation and what he goes
Mhm.
through in one of the episodes that plays out. And one of the things is people not taking it seriously in an authoritative way, whether it's the police department, who he reports it to, and feels often like so many of us, I think, to sort of sweep it under the rug and think, well, are we just being crazy? Maybe this isn't a real thing. If we tell somebody, are we going to be shamed or vilified?
Yeah.
And that doesn't do any good for anybody to keep those. And that's why we want to talk about this stuff. I know you had a story early on. You were telling me offline when you were growing up that really struck me and I think was extremely a good representation of exactly what we're talking about consensual
Mhm.
sex. Can you tell us?
Well, yes. I was younger, and an older cousin exposed himself to me and didn't ask, basically told me to perform oral sex on them.
That's
And
a
it
lot
was
to
very
digest.
traumatic. Yeah, it was a lot. I've never felt so vulnerable in vulnerable voices before. It's a lot.
And you know what? We thank you for sharing. Can I just ask about how old you were at the time?
I was around 10 to 12, definitely.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. And he was significantly older. And I was curious. So I feel like I would look at guys but it makes you feel like, what about you would make that person think that
It's
that was
okay.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it prepared me for a lot of situations that came later in life, which we'll definitely discuss. Um, but dramatic. And I've discussed this with my family.
Can I ask you, did you get support when you shared the story on what had happened from your family members?
I shared it with my nuclear family, so like my mom, my sister, my brother, and they all supported me for sure.
Right. And the thing about these things is oftentimes we share these stories not when they happen, but I'm assuming you didn't share it at.
It was maybe 2 years ago,
Right. So
maybe 5 years ago.
as we learn with so many of our guests on Tags podcast that have shared so much about the trauma that happens when we don't share some of our stories, it just gets pushed down and has an effect on it. And ultimately these things have to come out to grow and I'm glad you did though ultimately share, and not without share what you want, but did anybody ever make this person accountable?
My mother spoke to his mother, and where it went from there, I don't know.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think when these things happen, this person that did this to you violated you, and they're not thinking at the time on all years later on the effects that these things can happen on us. And it's trauma, I think, to put it in one word. Yeah, let's read some of our comments and go ahead, Cody.
So Jen says this is something that women deal with every day. Then she goes, having also been a survivor of abuse, I have become hyper vigilant to abusive and inappropriate behavior. And I agree with that 100%.
Wow.
It has definitely, having experienced that at such a young age, it has made me more hyper aware of when a situation could lead to the road of abuse, could lead to the realm of abuse. And she also says that predators have a sixth sense. That's probably in response to when I ask, what about me has made that person think that it was okay for him to do that to me? Yeah.
Thank you, Jen, for sharing that. I think,
Jen, for
yeah,
sharing that.
absolutely. You know, I also wanted to share because I've had a couple of stories of people preying on me, but I've also wanted to, I was sharing with you, Cody, offline about a story a few years back. I was going out and there was a manager of a bar that I would go to all the time. And it was always in, no one really knew if he was gay, straight. I don't even think anybody knows to this day. And I had befriended him. We had had a good rapport. He would invite me to stay after the bar closed and have some drinks. And at one point, I remember going to his apartment, which he lived really close to the bar. And I remember going to his place. We were having drinks at his place, but it wasn't sexual in nature, although I had a crush on him. And I remember being excited that I was hanging out with the manager of this bar, that I really liked this guy. And at one point, after some alcohol, because I think that's oftentimes when we're under the influence of certain things like alcohol, things get off. And I remember sitting on he was sitting in a chair, and I remember sitting on his lap and putting my arm like kind of around his neck. That's all I did. And he let me do that for a minute. I ended up that's it, crashing. I crashed at his place. And the next time I saw him, he said, when we were going to hang out like that, he said, you know, he essentially told me that he was uncomfortable with that, and that I think he said he didn't want me to do that. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, I had crossed a line. And see where some of this stuff can sometimes get on that line of inappropriate, because I think I was attracted to him and I wanted something to happen with him. And this was my way of worming my way in by sitting on his lap, but it wasn't okay with him. And he did
testing your boundaries.
Yeah, he let it happen. He didn't push me off at that moment. He did let me know later. I apologized, and I never did that again. But it did strike a chord in me with how the innuendos and how some of the subtleties of this stuff can go, where with alcohol, or when you may want something out of somebody, but they're not on the same page, and you might be persuasive to get something to happen on that particular night, and they might let it happen, but it doesn't mean that they're okay with it. And I'm glad that all of mine was really sitting on his lap, but he told me later, and in this kind of conversation, I saw will never happen again, and actually struck a chord with me. We'll check in. It struck a chord with me on something that's not okay for even me to do that. And I won't do that again. And I will check in with people more, and I will be that much quicker to really see, am I just doing this because I've been drunk before, and I'm one of those types when I drink to still have that idea that I can check in with myself. And I think I will now say, why am I doing this? And is this reciprocal? So there's different sides of all this. And I tell that story only to say the innuendos of how some of this stuff can get out of control.
Yeah. It's watching this show. It really it forced me to like really take a good hard look at encounters with other people. And there have definitely been times when alcohol has played a a negative influence on how I interact with people, or a carelessly. I acted carelessly with these people, amongst other substances. And I'm not judging. I'm not saying that I haven't done other things in my lifetime. So I recall one time in particular, when I was a freshman in college. Like you said, I'm the type of person, I can drink alcohol and I can remember things. Sometimes it comes back in flashes. Sometimes it's like a movie where, oh wait, what happened there? Oh,
Right, right.
it comes back a little bit in pieces. But generally most of the time it's the entire reel. And I know what happens when it happens.
Right.
But one time in particular, when I was a freshman in college, I lost a significant amount of time. And I woke up in a person's bed that I don't know what happened. And that's really scary to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much more you want to share. You were telling me offline.
I was telling you offline that
one of the areas you were sore, and I asked you, where were you in your ass?
Yeah.
Did you confront this person later?
I did not. I didn't say anything to him. He didn't say anything to me. It was something that we kind of swept under the rug. And one of the things that this show addresses is that for gay men specifically, and the world in general, this is something that is swept under the rug so often that is not really addressed. And because we don't know who to go to, or will be looked at in a certain light, so we're afraid to air these grievances.
Absolutely. I think the show does a brilliant job of that. And I just had a moment flash of, one of the things in this pandemic, since we've been all home, one of the things I've been doing is incorporating meditation. And one of the things about meditation or yoga is breathing and being in the moment. And one of the things that you can parlay that into real life is being conscientious and aware, and you and I have talked about that word a lot, awareness of choices, what's going on. And I think, if anything, with meditation, when you're really breathing and you're really in the moment, that's all that really matters. But when you are in the moment, you're less likely, you're conscientious of what is actually going on, instead of pulling yourself away, feeling like you're looking at yourself from above. And if something is happening to you, I've incorporated on minute levels. For example, I'm going to give you an example of how, on a small level, I've incorporated being in the moment. And recently I was you and I were upstate, and we went, and our host took us to dinner, and one of the guys came to meet us at dinner, and the guy had a mask on. We didn't know him, but he immediately put his hand out to shake my hand. And I had to have a split-second decision of, oh, wait a minute. No. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And everybody was looking and listening at that point. And I knew, even as I was going to say that was going to cause a stir for our host, it was their friends. And part of me is,
well.
Part of me, yeah. But I think a lot of us suffer from, how are we going to look? What's this going to ultimately mean? But by being in the moment, and what I don't want to do right now is shake someone's hand, I saw that happening, had a split-second moment to decide, no, oh, sorry, no, it's really nice to meet you, or maybe put my elbow out and shift it on what I'm not. I think and things like meditation, yoga help keep you in the moment to really critically breathe and live in the moment. And they're really good tactics. I know it sounds cliche, but they can be really good tactics to then parlay to when you are in situations to really analyze and examine what is really happening right now, and what am I okay with, and what am I not going to allow to happen right now, and tell somebody, no, this isn't okay.
Definitely goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and about learning what your comfortability level is and moving from there. You really have to address it within yourself. And like you said, meditation is one way that you can really get in touch with who you are inside. And it sounded really corny when it was coming out of my mouth even, but it's true. So really get in touch with who you are and what you want to allow, and then move from there.
Absolutely. And I think we have to be more critically aware of and checking in with ourselves on what is okay for us. And this pandemic is really a good example of that, on what we're willing to put ourselves in the midst of or not. And it has to just be okay. I think these are really good conversations. Do we have any comments from anybody that's checking in?
Jen says it is really apt of society to victim shame. And she says, this is why we all have that little internal voice that makes us feel it's not okay to say no. Ooh, what do you think about that?
Say that last part again.
She says, this is why we all have that little internal voice that makes us feel like it's not okay to say no.
Because of societal pressures.
Exactly.
Right. And I think, going just back to my simple example of, we were hosted by this friend of ours that brought us out. These were his friends. One of the friends puts his hand out. My societal guilt, if you will, was, I don't want to cause a scene and be that guy that wants.
They can feel rejected, basically.
Yeah. But if you notice, you were at the table. And because this is what we do, where we host and everything. I was like, oh no, I'm okay. And I did this recently with somebody else that wanted to like shake my hand. And part of me is, now I'm like, if you put your hand out to shake my hand, I'm really like, seriously? Didn't we
get that elbow right there?
Didn't we put that in the vault and shut it tight and put it on like planet Mars like a while ago? I'm amazed that people are still, hey, how are you, with the hand thing. And I've never liked that. That was never a thing I liked.
Oh, really?
No, I wasn't. I'm a hugger.
Oh, me too.
Kiss on both. I'm an air kisser. I'm not. Certain people, I can give you a hug, like a real hug, but no, I was just never a part of. So I'm like, good riddance. But I'm at this point, I'm standing my voice on lubrication in my ass. You must have, and no shaking hands. These are my things. I'm just saying. And good wine.
Yes. So JJ says he's a hairdresser, and it's an automatic no for handshaking and hugging. He says it's super uncomfortable, but most people seem to understand, and you shouldn't be shamed. And then he goes to say, yes, lube always. And I agree with him. Yes, lube always. I should get that printed on my forehead, I feel like.
Yes, you should. Thanks for playing. Follow us at Tags Podcast. Go to Talk About Gay Sex. Be safe, but keep it sexy and wear your mask. And we'll talk to you soon.